Although I should maybe.
You're fine.
Okay.
You're fine. Here we are pondering on how should we look at this streaming. It's a live stream, but I don't think we're gonna get any audience because it's a brand new channel.
Never know.
And well, the way YouTube, which is one of the reasons that I have you. Well, why don't you introduce yourself first?
My name is Paul Gilman. I'm a member of the Green Party of New York. I've been studying history on and off, well, mostly on since I was five. I have a degree in it. I've been studying the philosophy that goes on with history, specifically Marxism. And I think that's why what we're here to discuss, the actual general belief system.
Yeah, I got very excited when you told me that, and that you are actually, very knowledgeable, and you're a historian when it comes to communism. And the reason that we met one of my friends' party, and he said that, and it's like, well, I've been meaning to have somebody to talk to about real facts about communism. So what I was saying about that YouTube only promote now people, like big shots. This is pure capitalism.
Right.
If anybody got like 100,000 subscribers and 100,000 views a video, then they get promoted. And so it is like a vicious cycle. Then you cannot get an audience because you are a quote unquote nobody. And you are a quote unquote nobody because they won't promote you. They won't promote you. They're just like but people, they swear by this damn system that it's just.
Well, isn't this being archived or anything, or?
Well, I should have archived my videos, but I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, I the ones that I really regret is because I had the entire campaign from López Obrador, right before the elections. It was like, and that was such hard work because you have to look him up on Facebook.
Right.
Not every live stream is good. It was all shaky or whatever. And then I edited, and back then YouTube was allowing you to edit your videos. You can put colors, you can stabilize them, you could do a lot of stuff. Now they even took that.
Right. Okay.
So YouTube is just take, and it's like, oh no, I have to buy a program now if I want to edit my videos. When I go, because I consider myself an oral historian too, and that's one of the things that gave me great pleasure to go to events. Like I was just talking about the Honorable Malcolm X. I would go to his birthday march that they have on 125th, and record it, and so all that stuff is gone. So there's no use in regretting. Maybe I should start backing it up. This is what they create. They create this. How do you pronounce it in English? Guerrilla.
Oh,
guerrilla tactics when you have to, and this is what everybody's doing on YouTube right now. They're uploading channels and erasing them and uploading them again later on. People complain. People, they have to hide. It's just like it's ridiculous. What we go through just to and the craziest thing to me is that on average my videos was getting like 50, 60 views each.
That's something.
I know, but they found that threatening. They found that threatening. 50 views. I can imagine if I was getting 1 million views and I was like, okay, this bitch is waking up too many people. So it's like.
Yeah, but some of the people they do allow. I mean, I don't watch a lot of YouTube, but some of them, the right-wing talk show host people, the David Ikes.
I didn't watch lectures.
Right.
I was talking about Dr. Clark. I was talking about
Dr. Clark. Yeah.
Yeah, I love his lectures. I mean, like I live for his lectures.
I like Michelle Alexander's lectures.
I don't know her.
Michelle Alexander wrote The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Color Blindness.
That
which is
sounds very familiar.
yeah. Well, it's considered the latest phase in the civil rights movement as far as the incarceration of black people through the drug war is a way of disenfranchising them. You know, like once you get a drug war conviction, you can a lot of times you lose your vote, you lose your gun rights. Sometimes you are not you can never get certain social programs. It's harder to get a job. Forces a lot of people into more menial labor, and it's they couldn't do it through Jim Crow anymore because obviously there's a constitutional issues that it took generations for them to
We are
admit were
supposed to
true.
be a moral authority
Yeah,
because
right.
we apply sanctions
You
to
said
every
they're
country.
supposed to be an amoral authority.
Amoral, yeah. No, but
Yeah.
we apply sanctions to everybody.
Oh yeah, I know, but we're talking
As if
about.
we was like,
Well, I'm talking about internally. Yes, internationally, I'm not arguing with you.
no, but that's what I mean. Internally, you could not be applying sanctions to every other country if you have Jim Crow, kind of like apartheid and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So that's why it was
Well,
it was a PR move.
the only reason they
to
went
end
against
Jim Crow.
apartheid was because of the huge protests against it, and it was so blatant and obvious. But they were like Dick Cheney voted. Apartheid came down during the struggle to not buy the Krugerrand, which was South Africa issued this gold coin called the Krugerrand, and it was supposed to help finance the regime and get around the blockades.
Interesting, because
and then
Gaddafi wanted to do his golden art.
Right, but the Krugerrand was more
killed.
it wasn't meant to be used as currency. It was more used as collectibles. You bought a Krugerrand,
okay.
put a little frame, or maybe you could trade it or something.
So,
it was never meant to threaten the U.S. dollar.
So I have my first question about, but this one is for capitalism. So because I watch and lectures and stuff. So incarceration, how big is incarceration to capitalism in the United States, to this economic model that we got right now? Which, by the way, what is the economic model here in the United States? Do you know?
Well, there's competing economic models within the capitalist world itself. The first one is more of a Keynesian model where the government. Yeah, I gotta let it cool down. Where the Keynesian, I'll start over again. The first model is a Keynesian model in which the government does interfere in the economy through raising or lowering taxes, raising or lowering the prime rate for borrowing money from the feds, or even, like issuing currency, when sometimes they need things to get a little inflationary to encourage, or, lower the value of the dollar to encourage exports. Sometimes they want to raise it because if your currency, money itself is a commodity with supply and demand, if there's a bigger supply than the demand, and the value goes down, and it makes it harder to buy stuff overseas. So this whole Keynesian John Kenneth Galbraith came out sort of under Roosevelt. Before that, the other competing model is the free traders or the neoliberals. They don't believe the government should interfere in capitalism whatsoever, other than giving their corporate buddies tax breaks, and making the workers and everybody
responsible. That's like, I don't know, I'm close. That's the Republican. That is like small government, kind of like neoliberalism.
Yeah, well, neoliberalism, believe it or not, is also they put it on an international model, and neoliberalism is really the hallmarks of the Clintonite Democrats. They're imposing neoliberalism on Latin America. For instance, Costa Rica and Puerto Rico both had phone companies that were owned by the people or the government, socialized phone companies, and they were both forced to privatize the phone system. That's just one tiny example of there's numerous ones.
But it sounds like Republican because they talk about small government. So
Right, right. Well,
neoliberalism
there's
is
some
like
overlap in it, but
it's about you know just letting the corporations run amok, ain't it?
right, right. But the Democrats are for that too. The Republicans, they're more like the neoconservatives, and they're not, they're for small government and letting the corporations do what they want. They don't want a lot of regulations, but they're not interested in the overseas empire, whereas the neoliberalism is more about the globalization. The neoconservatives tend to tie the economic system with sort of their fake, lying, racist, moral, patriarchal, hypocritical, old school, religious systems, whatever, return to those old values. Sometimes, like they kind of have mixed feelings about large corporations. They do like the manufacturing section, whereas the Democrats will focus more on the finance and the banking section because the finance and banking is global, and the manufacturing, is local. And so there's that kind of division.
Okay, so can you give us, a quick history of capitalism in the United States?
Right.
Just gonna make sure that the
As
live stream is happening.
okay,
Just checking because sometimes you don't have sound or yeah, you do have sound. It's all right. We look okay. Look, this
yeah.
is how we see it. And I'm gonna give me a like. So, um, yeah, I mean, when was the first time that the United States heard about capitalism? Your tea must be cold already because
Yeah.
it's freezing in here.
Okay, I'm not
This
really cold.
you're not because you came from outside, so
Well,
this look hot to you.
I'm descended
It's
from
hot to you.
bears and wolves, and we're used to the cold.
Okay, okay, but
I think
it's like once that you settle down, you're gonna be like, okay, what's going on in this
I'm
house?
very comfortable. In fact, I think this is perfect weather for me.
No, but I say the water it get really cold really quick.
It's okay. Good tea, thank you.
Okay, so when was the last time in the United States, people heard about communism, or there was like, is there a communist party in the United States?
Oh yeah, there's a communist party in the United States.
Are you a militant? Are you?
Well, yeah. I
are you
mean,
registered?
no, I'm not registered. I'm not going to register as a communist. That's no one's business. You're supposed to communism is not supposed to be all about just talking. It's supposed to actually work, dedicate your life working towards it. If you have, as Mao says, theory without practice is useless. What's the point? But if you have practice and no theory, you're going to screw things up. So you have to learn to combine the two. There's sort of a recursive thing where your practice helps refine your ideological belief system. And your ideological belief system, you learn the lessons, then you can reapply them and hopefully move forward. So in the U.S., there's a traditional communist party. I'm not really the expert on the history. I have all these friends that constantly lecture me. I'm not a particular advocate for any particular one, but the old traditional CP kind of got lost, like in the Stalinist Trotskyist debates, and the CP they call it Communist Party USA in the 30s was very good defending the rights of black people, or at least the Scottsboro Boys. They're the only ones that.
What is the Scottsboro Boys?
The Scottsboro Boys were a bunch of, during the 30s, during the mass depression, like all kinds of people lost their homes and their livelihoods. There was something like 30% unemployment. And of course, that's national. That whatever happens to white people, it happens 2 or 3 times worse for the black and the brown people. And so there was all these people who were rolling around. That's where you get the idea of the hobo, people that jump on trains and go from one place to the next.
Mhm.
And it became sort of a thing. You're looking for the next job. You're looking for, anywhere where you can kind of restart your life again.
Mhm.
So there are all these people on the railroads, including many, many black people. And there was, I forgot which state, but somewhere in the South, there was a bunch of black people on this freight car, and somehow these two white women got on there. And back then, the miscegenation, however you say that, the mixture, the
Miscegenation
taboo,
laws.
somehow white people found out that these two white women were on the train doing what? It's highly speculative. But the point is, in order to save their good name, they claimed they were raped, and they weren't. And there was about 15 of these Scottsboro boys, and it became a national. They all got sentenced to be executed. Some of them were as young as 15, and some of them were like in their 40s.
Oh, I never even heard it.
Yeah, and so
what state was this again?
I don't remember the state. You can look it up online.
Yeah, that's right. That's all right.
But
let's try to. This is gonna be like, I just wanted to make like a synopsis.
Okay, but
so people can do their own research based on what we touch.
All right, but the CP was the only group willing to defend these people. They sent lawyers down south to defend them, and they're the ones that organized a popular front. To help protect the Soviet Union from the Nazis. They were the first of the anti-fascists. Then but then they sort of became a little too tied to Stalin. And after World War II, after Stalin died, they kind of lost their rudder. And when the 60s came, they didn't understand the youth culture, and there was all kinds of split. And there's all kinds of like.
So let me see if I understand what I. I think you're talking about that communism came out to suppress fascism.
Well, they were Well, also the fascism rose in response to communism.
Oh.
So,
Wow.
But then the communists knew, they had to defend themselves. They saw very clearly, the fascists made no bones. Hitler made no bones that his real goal was to take over the Soviet Union and to crush communism. Same with Mussolini.
And why he hated it so much, Hitler? Why he hated communism so much? Because we was told that he hated Jewish people.
He did.
But
they equated communism with Judaism.
Why? How they do that? Because that's not the reality today. They own 90% of the real estate in this country.
Who?
Jewish people.
No, they don't.
They don't? Okay. So they don't. Okay, so setups, how much real estate actually?
I don't know,
Jewish
but
people
it's focusing on.
Because I read several articles. It's like in many ways, not just directly ownership, but it is an alarming amount of real estate.
See.
I mean, we know that they purchase a lot of the Section 8 apartments. We know that here in New York City alone.
New York City has a lot of Jews in it, but you go national.
But I understand
Jews
that's a touchy subject, and let's not,
okay.
let's
just
you
really want to get to the essence of communism.
No, I'm just very puzzled that Jewish is associated with communism because they're money hoarders.
But that's kind of a racist.
Land hoarders.
No, they're not. No more than anyone else.
Really?
Yeah.
How many Mexicans own land in this country? And we lost 60% of our land.
Yeah, but that wasn't the Jews didn't take it.
Well, I don't know if the
Texas
Jews,
wasn't
but maybe the Jewish took it.
The Jews didn't take it. That was taken by the War of 1848. That was taken by like white people. Why?
Listen, there's some known fact that a lot of Jewish people did plastic surgery, changed their last names, relaxed their hair, and all this stuff. And now, why is the world the way it is?
Because you're blaming the Jews.
I mean, You're gonna take him the International Monetary Fund, who control it,
That was the
the World Bank.
They're not controlled by the Jews.
They're not.
No.
So like Netanyahu have nothing to do with it.
They're part of it. Everybody. There are Mexicans that
This
are
is
part
this is
of
why
it.
this is why I like to sit down, because this is like,
But that's
I'm not the only one. There's millions of people who follow the money. All you gotta do is just follow the money, and follow the.
Well, this is kind of becoming a problem because you're never going to resolve the problem with that kind of. It's
Well,
kind
it
of
is a
racist
fact.
because most Jews aren't rich.
Well, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. You know, I mean, like,
I mean,
let's say talk about the Upper West Side, Washington
But
Heights.
that's your experience in New York.
Harlem.
New York is a Jewish, part Jewish.
It went from 85% being black and brown. Now it's less than
right, but
50%.
But who were the mayors? They were Italians.
And who owned these buildings?
A lot of them were Jews, but who were the ones that who were the cops?
I mean, who are the cops?
The Irish.
Well, the cops are to protect
Italian,
corporate interests. We
and,
know
and
that.
the Italians.
They don't protect
all
us.
And a lot of these buildings, right? A lot of these buildings, but they have their own interests, their own stake.
Okay,
in
let's get past it, because this talk is about communism.
Yeah, but
this talk is about communism,
like,
and the only thing that struck me, but that's when I'm gonna do my research.
Yeah,
That's when I'm gonna do my research.
Incredible.
I'm glad that I hear this. I'm glad that I hear this
because now you're blaming Jews when Trump and everyone is blaming Mexicans for all the crimes. I mean, is it true that Mexicans?
I mean, shouldn't we? After they stole 60% of our land,
no.
Should we be happy? Should we be say kumbaya? Or turn the other cheek?
But are you running around
to get the other 60% of our land?
People?
They are right now threatening to call, drug trafficking. They're
Right.
calling it terrorism.
Right.
They are planning to do the same thing to us, what they did to Syria, what they did, all this stuff, because they are terrorists,
and I'm against
and we
that.
gotta bomb them. So it is the same MO. I mean,
but that's
like,
not the Jews are doing that.
I didn't say that. I talk about real estate, and now you talk about
because it's the same people who run the country who are doing the whole thing. Because when you reduce everything to ethnicity, you're turning everything into a conspiracy theory and you're taking class politics out of it.
I'm not.
And as long as you take class politics, you can never advance.
A conversation that we're having, and my word is worth zero. So basically,
but you have this TV show.
Basically, yes, I have it, and the reason I moved to the United States because there was freedom of press, freedom of opinion, and I feel like I'm being repressed right now because of my comments. If you don't agree, let's move on. Can we move on?
Okay. All right, but I mean,
can we do the American way, supposedly quote unquote American way? Where you agree, we have opposite views on that, but the reason that you're here is because of communism. And you just told me that communism, the reason that Hitler hated the Jewish people was because communism.
Well, they hated them even before communism. They always hated the Jewish people. They didn't just hate them because of communism, but then communism got associated with you. Anything that they didn't like, all of a sudden they said it was Jewish.
Okay. All right. So let's move on from that.
They even lied about the banking system. Most of the banks were owned by white Protestant Germans. And our ruling class, the U.S. ruling class, is not Jewish. It's kind of an offensive statement.
Well, I'm Mexican. I'm used to hearing so much offensive shit that I don't tiptoe around other people's shit, because nobody come out in defense of the Mexicans.
Yes,
nobody. I never seen them. But not on video, not like in a significant manner. It's just like if it's trendy, people they flock to the airport and they do whatever they think it's trending, and it's just like. But then we are still suffering. Right. We are trying to go left. Right now, we have a government, a leftist government, and I don't see nobody like, hey, Let's stick out for Mexico. Let's not let Mexico become another Venezuela. Let's not Mexico become another Bolivia. Let's not Mexico, I mean, I don't see that. And you want me to have empathy and sympathy for people that I don't even know. They've never even taken the time to come. I'm here 26 years in this building. Half of it is Jewish, and they don't care about unless it's their own people. This is the country of racism.
Right.
The country is racist.
I'm not denying
everybody's for themselves. So why should I be for somebody else?
Because you're cutting away a lot of allies. You don't think that some of those pro-immigrant
if I didn't believe that you
demonstrations-
wouldn't be here. If I didn't believe that, you wouldn't be here.
Right. I mean, you don't believe that a lot of the people who go to the pro-immigrant and defend the Mexican people who are getting arrested are Jewish?
But I believe everybody wants to do put in like a little band-aid.
There's no Jews involved in that?
It's not a significant manner. Come on. You're asking me
because
you're asking me to go to
population-wise
to a snake pit and pick the ones that are not venomous.
Population-wise, there's probably more Jews in the civil rights movement than the other right.
And that's control of position. I told you when I met you, the nonprofit industrial complex is control of position. Everything keeps getting worse. Now we're going to have 3 jails instead of just one Rikers Island. How do you think it came about? Well, who is George Soros is the one sponsoring all these pet projects.
He's Greek.
Well, I don't care. I don't know where he is. I know he worked for the Rothschilds. You see, this is what I'm telling you. But this is like just how you have to follow the money. But this is not why we are here. So let's move on. So what is communism?
Okay. Well, first of all, look at the word communism itself. You know what the root word for communism is?
Commune?
Yes.
Community?
Yes. And commune and community.
The social.
All of them.
The social.
Where we commune, not only we commune with each other, as much as we're talking about communing with nature, which is great. Ultimately, all human beings have to learn to commune with each other. Doesn't really matter their ethnicity. You're supposed to get beyond that because no ethnicity is ever going to be able to stand alone. That's the fact. There is an internationalist movement of people from all the continents, from indigenous people. I'm sorry, it's hard. And from even certain upper middle class people who decide to abandon their class status. That may seem hard to believe, but it's there.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not a majority. It's people who want to see a better world, not based on hate and exploitation.
Want some water?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll have some water.
Just a little bit.
No problem. Take your time. Take your time. This is not television. This is the beauty of it. We can slow down, and all people gotta do is just fast forward it.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Thank you. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. Why are you sorry? I mean, like, you cough, you cough. That's one of the things. That's one of the reasons I hate television, because each minute of television it costs like $100,000 minimum or something.
Yeah.
$1 million per minute. So not here. We can do in our own pace, and we can So, but if anybody wanted to say, what is like a characteristic? So how
Well,
can
let me finish.
Oh,
what I
I'm
was
sorry.
saying.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
So, we want to commune with each other, And real communists believe that while we celebrate ethnic diversity and cultural diversity, it's what makes us strong, it's what makes this world beautiful. There's also class. We try to organize along class because ultimately, whether you're picking sugar cane or coffee or doing backbreaking labor in one country or factory work in Mexico or factory work in the US or China, those are the people being exploited. It doesn't matter your ethnicity. If you are in that situation, you have more in common in one sense with the person, another factory worker from a different part of the world, than the rich people in your own country. You may speak the same language as the rich person. You may share a lot of the cultural traits. Theirs might be a little bit more refined. Of course, the workers are considered more real, and so it's hopefully we can break down these ethnic barriers and have universal support for each other. And the people that actually do the work, they should get all the money. They should get all the profits. And that's the very bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
When you reduce everything, see, there's a tendency, it's a very right-wing tendency to reduce everything to ethnicity, and that keeps us apart. And, you blame this group there, you blame that group there, but you're never actually blaming the actual system in which someone is exploited. And the Jews, many of the greatest labor organizers were Jewish, and they've given their lives for the cause. So for sure, there's Jewish rich people who exploit other people. But the mass of the ruling class in this country is WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. The Jews are like just underneath, and now they're sort of intermarriage. And, there's all these little hierarchical games they play, look at Trump, and I'm denouncing Trump. His daughter married a Jew. He's not Jewish. So there's all this thing going on, and you can't say there's not like this room where all the Jews go and make this conspiracy to do that.
You don't need to be self-defensive. People, they know that your opinion is your opinion. My opinion is my opinion. This is a platform that is not for that, to defend other people's, because they sure have enough lawyers to defend themselves. We know that. And I don't want you to feel like you're on the spot, and whoever watches this video, they're going to be like, oh, you're associating with that horrible woman. You just came here out of the goodness of your heart to talk about communism, because I asked you, and I'm extremely grateful about that. And I don't want you to reflect on you.
Okay, yeah.
Well, because I feel like you're upset, like you said, now this is going to reflect because my friends and stuff like that. But it is not you, and trust me, it's not him. It's not him. It's
me. I'm certainly not ruling class. Yeah, well, we can talk about that. I know. I've gotten certain, white male privilege. I recognize that, but I've also,
But it's not really. I don't think it's about masculinity. It's just about capitalism. And, and traditionally,
it's about entitlement. There's these Europeans that first came to the U.S. and struggled and all of that, and created this white Anglo-Saxon English-speaking culture, feel that they have certain entitlements, and communism threatens that, because communism makes everybody equal, whereas they don't feel everybody's equal. They feel that everybody, like I said, they rank, and they go up and down. Like at one time, the Irish were the lowest, and one time the Italian. It goes up and down depending on what's going on. And then it went more from ethnicity, and the blacks were always in the bottom. So I'm saying in their viewpoint, not in mine. I'm denouncing that. So if you're going to really look at the origins of communism, I mean, philosophically, it came into it. There was all kinds of precedents for communism in sort of the French Revolution was sort of gearing a little bit towards that with the urban
That was
people.
18 what?
The French Revolution happened in 1791.
Oh, 1791. I'm sorry, 18.
Right.
Duh. 1791.
Yeah.
So that's like around the time that communism became.
Well, no, I mean it depends on how you define it. You know, there's all kinds of.
Well, okay, and the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's one. I've criticisms of Eurocentric view of the world, which is unfortunately Marxism came out of that, and I don't know how Eurocentric Marx and Engels themselves were, but I know from my own experience, far too many of their philosophical heirs have that, and so that makes it harder to actually organize along communist lines because they've never dealt with their own senses of entitlement or even their own sense that they're smarter than everybody, and they're really not. Actually, many of them are brilliant. Most are pretty stupid. You know, that's a personal experience.
Mhm.
Marx his parents were Jewish, you know, but he partnered up with this guy Frederick Engels, whose parents were almost ruling class bourgeois.
Engels' parents was?
Yeah, well, Engels ran a factory.
But isn't he supposed to be like the godfather of communism or something?
Yeah, well, they jointly put together the Communist Manifesto, which came out in 1848, which was the first shots of making revolution and really looking at things systemically, as opposed to looking at things like when you had the Owenites, this guy Owens try to set up communes and knew there was something wrong, and hopefully, you know, they call themselves utopian socialism, and they were still learning how to do it, but it wasn't very scientific in the beginning. So Marx and Engels tried to turn it into a science, and that science is based on dialectics. And dialectics is the notion that everything in the universe is in constant motion, and those motions are caused by, you know, we were talking about this when we were talking about quantum mechanics on the party.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these motions are caused by forces acting on each other. You know, like every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Laws of thermodynamics. In the dialectics of Marx and Engels, they break it down into three categories, which are interpenetration, which is you get two forces mingling, you have blue, you have yellow, mingling, the synthesis is green, or you have the second one is quantitative changes lead to qualitative change, which you say you take ice or water. And Engels uses this, and I recommend people read Frederick Engels' Socialism, Utopian and Scientific. He talks about this. You take water, it's liquid, right? You add heat to it. You keep adding heat until you hit a critical mass, and it becomes gas, steam, right? So that's quantitative. You're quantitatively changing the amount of heat in this until you get a qualitative change. Then you pull the heat out, and then it comes back to water. You keep pulling the heat out more and more until it becomes the next stage underneath the cold is solid, right? Ice, exactly. You know, so that's qualitative changes lead to quantitative changes. And then once a thing comes into being, you know, like, okay, so you change this into ice, right? And then it still affects the room around it. Now the room's a little colder. So you have what they call negate. You know, you negated the liquid and turned it into a solid. So, but it still exists in the universe, and there's no vacuum and everything. All the forces around it act on it. So either ice will melt, or it'll cool up the room, or something, depending on what's going on. But that ice, if it'll eventually be turned into something else because of all the forces around it, unless it stays static. For like the Egyptian pyramids seem to defy that, but they really don't. They're just changing slowly, like rust, steel, oxygen slowly.
So it's kind of like a weather forecasting.
Kind of.
With the
It's a
people.
recognition that nothing is, like the ancient Greeks and all of that were looking at things, and the things were always disappearing or changing. You leave a carcass in the woods, and next you know it's gone. They're looking at the impermanent. Things weren't seen as permanent. Our lives weren't permanent. They would create stuff, and something would blow it up, or it'll just whatever.
Impermanence.
Impermanence, right?
Third dimension shit.
Right, exactly. So
that's where we at.
Well, right. Well, and for Westerners, right, that's when under the Greeks, under the pre-Socratics, they thought in terms of dialectics. So did the rest of the world. The Chinese with the yin and yang, that's dialectics. The Hindus with the Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma dialectic. Shiva and Vishnu combine to make Brahma. And Western chauvinism says that that's all just spiritual, metaphysical stuff. But for many people it is. But the real enlightened beings knew that applied to everyday things on your table. I'm sure in the Native American traditions have similar dialectics. Similar conflicts of different forces leading to
but that's eternity. That is eternity.
Could be eternity.
I mean, it's like people in religion, they look into, for their pie in the sky and stuff, and that's women, men, and a man have a child. That's now talk about epigenetics. I don't know if you heard about epigenetics.
I heard about it, but I'm not.
And it's just more comprehensive, how really everything that happened to our ancestors is in our blood.
Right, okay.
Because our blood got a lot of minerals.
There's cumulative effects. So there will be a quantitative change, lead to qualitative. It'll lead to it's the internal contradictions within us mixing with the external contradictions, which will lead to our evolution. And we're at a crossroads now, because now hopefully we know about this. We can affect which way we want to evolve to, and there's different forces. But we'll put that aside for now. Classical Marxism. So we talk about dialectics. Well, what does that have to do with revolution? Right. Well, it's a recognition that social systems are not permanent. When you're in a social system, you think, oh, it's always. How many people? How often have you heard? Oh, it's always been like this. It always will be.
A lot.
Okay. Well, much, I mean, you look out your window, and you can't see it on this, but there's beautiful trees and everything. That dominated Manhattan. They didn't have capitalism when white people first came here, when the Dutch first came here. This was run by Indians. Even the Dutch, and the English were more mercantile, which is a precursor of capitalism. It's a developmental thing, So it's a notion that you may think that your world has always been one way and will never change because you don't have the grander view. I call it temporal provincialism. You only know your time and place, and don't try to imagine the future and know nothing about the past. You abandon that, and you see that social systems do collapse. And so that leads to Marxist sociology, which kind of divides society into their stages of development, which is hunting and gathering, which is, not necessarily the most primitive, but, as we evolve, we didn't evolve all of a sudden. We had skyscrapers. One day there's human beings, and the next day they're melting steel for skyscrapers. It took like thousands of years to develop
Yeah,
that.
everybody used to work, in order to eat, in order to
Well,
have stuff
even the work.
with
I
the
mean,
hands, work with the hands.
well, when you're a hunter and gatherer, and there's still there's still hunting and gathering societies alive today. Like people tend to look at this as, oh, this is way back, this is millions of years. No, thousands of years ago. No, there's still some of this stuff still survives today in Latin America, in the rainforest, mainly, even amongst some of the Inuit, sort of go back and forth to that. That's when they're most healthy, when they get to live their traditional lives. Um, you know, um, your society's values and outlooks reflect at the level of development. When everybody's hunting and gathering, it's harder to have like a hierarchy,
Mhm.
because if you don't like someone, you just go hunt and gather somewhere else. You know,
Hmm.
and
It's true, I guess. Yeah.
well, I mean, it may be hard. You can
Well,
defect. You can join another
later
nation.
on, they came out with a tribute. You had to pay tribute
Yeah, well, okay,
to share the
that's
space.
over a period of development. That's
Yeah, that
when
was
that's
much
when
much later.
that's when people, populations grew and there was less places to run away from. And even, there's more equality between the sexes, because you're out hunting. How you gonna, the woman could hunt too. She don't need you. The
Mhm.
man don't, the man, like, so I know in the indigenous people of New York State, in this area, they divided up. The men, if they wanted to eat, they had to treat the women nice. So they would bring them the food, but they couldn't eat until the women said it was okay. And that was one of the ways. Eventually that was going to disappear, and it did disappear. So you start from hunting and gathering. And then once people learn agriculture and they start settling down, populations explode. Not everyone's involved in, as you said, food production or clothing. They're farmers, and not everyone is needed to farm. There's a surplus amount of food. So that surplus creates the class system, the priest class, the warrior class, maybe artisans, potteries, stuff like that. There are people who are freed from actual food gathering, and they wind up dominating the society for whatever reason, the strongest guy. Well, I'm protecting you from the hunting and gatherers. Hunting and gatherers, they became warriors, Oh, there's all these people eating all this food going, so you need someone to fend them off, And so eventually you get the class system, and I mean, the Mayans and the Toltecs and all of them. You go back to ancient Mesopotamia with Syria and ancient Egypt and China. That process seems to be, whether it's universal or not, is debatable. You have to look at your history and your anthropology and your sociology and do real studies of that, right?
Mhm.
And eventually feudalism has its own dynamics, it grows and everything. And, the contradictions within feudalism kind of come to head. Remember, there's not a capitalist class. One of the chief characteristics of feudalism is handicraft production. Handicraft production is where, you don't use machines, you do everything by hand. So
Wow.
if you want a pair of shoes, there's a shoemaker, but he can only make so many shoes per year,
Mhm.
The sword maker and this and that. And also most production is used for local consumption. In other words, there is some trade of surplus, but it's not the dominant thing. Most of the stuff grown and used is for the local. Then if there's leftover and you're not saving for an emergency, you would trade that if you want,
Mhm.
right? So what ends feudalism is, so the merchant class, the sellers, the buyers, the capitalist class barely exists, if it exists at all. And some people say, no, it's a different thing, whatever. But, I mean, they live on the fringes, they're not part of the feudal system. There's no lord there. They don't owe allegiance they kind of owe allegiance to the Lord. They're not peasants, and they're considered parasites because, they have to make a profit. So they buy something for something, and the profit is you sell something for a higher price than you actually paid for it. And
Well, I feel like there's similarities to feudalism because the Lord he was doing a lot of like fear mongering.
oh yeah, well, it's an oppressive
So
system. I'm not saying
everybody was like, oh, you wanted protection, right? You wanted to come in and when the barbarians or whatever came to attack. So now we see that with terrorism and stuff like that, we're losing our civil liberties. Like constantly now the gangs, the Salvatorian MS-13,
the poorest
and
gang in
whatnot,
the hemisphere,
and
we're all scared.
and it's just an excuse for them to eavesdrop, to listen to everything we do, and we lost a lot.
Right. So the feudal classes was oppressive. They used to fight all the time. If you live medieval history, they're fighting the church and the state, and the peasants are all getting killed. And, that's very true. We're talking about hierarchies in class, and the feudal class has all these entitlements. Like there are parts of Europe where the Lord, when the peasant got married, the Lord was allowed to sleep with the bride at the first night. Like, there's all kinds of stories like that. That's one of the most famous cliches.
That's what I say. But you have to keep people in fear.
Right.
Well, they're gonna come the barbarians and they're gonna kill everybody, whatever.
Well, it is true. For kids to be a lord,
to get protection from me, you gotta work for me.
Well, I studied the origins of feudalism in Europe, and in order to be a lord, you had to be really strong. You had to be able to fight. You're probably bigger and stronger than half the people. The Vikings. A lot of the feudal class came from Scandinavians, Germans invading. And they kicked ass. And so it's funny because back then to be a feudal lord, you had to be pretty tough, right? And it took a while for it to gel and become hereditary and everything, but eventually that did happen. And they got more and more sense of entitlements. And now you look at someone who gets knighted, like an Elton John.
Yeah, they're very weak.
Yeah, they're like I respect, I like Elton's music. I'm not putting him down, but it just makes me laugh that the whole idea of aristocracy, and basically,
it's not intellectual strength. It's not.
Well, he's got some
physical strength. I mean, like to say, well, I don't know.
Actually, to be a feudal lord, it helped if you were stupid because you're willing to do stuff that normal people wouldn't want to do. You're there standing in front of the Mongol horde.
Really?
Well, sometimes.
But I don't think
I'm just being facetious.
Once they acquire more land, they didn't have to do it themselves. They had
right. Well, they exploited. They set up a hierarchy.
I mean, the first landlord.
Yeah, and they had the earls. There was a whole hierarchy. Then they had people underneath them to administer it, and then but eventually. Once handicraft production, in order to overthrow feudalism, there's three things had to happen. You okay?
Yeah, just went the wrong way, I guess.
You had to have change in the means of production, in other words, change from handicraft production to factory production. So now, if you own a shoe factory, instead of making like, I don't know, it takes 3 days to make a pair of shoes or 2 days. Figure how many pairs of shoes can you make a year, right? And we're not talking about taking off for holidays.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it takes 1 day to make a pair of shoes, you can only make so many.
So the Industrial Revolution just
right. So now you can make like
brutal
thousands of shoes a day,
exploitation, right?
And you get all this money, and so it's changing the means of production.
Because you wouldn't even be out in the field. You will be locked up in a room,
right,
and producing.
Well, how they created the factory class, the proletariat, the people. There's a history of that, and they started with the enclosure laws. We're actually forcing peasants off their communal lands and into the factories, and they're setting up the bourgeois state slowly. It's eating away at the feudal state. In England, it started more or less in the 1640s. With the overthrow of, of, of Charles the First, which led to Oliver Cromwell, and then the Restoration.
Charles the First from Britain, or?
Yeah, from
okay.
Well, he was England.
From England.
Yeah,
okay.
the British Isles. James.
Okay.
They unified the crown, and England became British. But it's whatever.
Yeah, but back then it was just.
So there's a history of that. They had to create a factory class, and they'd use the most brutal means to do it.
Factory class. I never heard that term.
Well, it's proletariat, the classical term.
It sounds pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Just live in the factory all day.
Right. And so they created that, and that was the bourgeois. There's two definitions of bourgeois. The technical term is you own the means of production within capitalism. You own the factory, you own the store, you own the bar, whatever, And then the vulgar definition just means middle class. And so Americans tend to throw, the United States people, North America, gringos tend to throw away the term bourgeois.
You ever watch, El Chavo del Ocho? You ever watch, it's from the 70s.
No.
You never heard El Chapulín, El Chavo? It's like a Mexican comedy. So there was they lived in this una vecindad, which is like, it's like a multi-familiar unit, for poor people. Still, they still have it, I think, everywhere in Latin America, no? So there's a character in La Vecindad, which is like, I don't know what would be the translation, vecindad in English. There's a character that she's always uppity and she don't want to talk to nobody. Come mierda, exactamente. So that's the syndrome. Her name is Doña Florinda. Doña Florinda syndrome, because she's broke too. She's like everybody else, but she thinks she's bourgeois.
Right. There's all kinds of attacks against bourgeois morality, all kinds of, aristocracy didn't like it. If you're going into Louis XIV France, Moliere's plays, he's a famous playwright that used to, most of them were comedies that would make Louis XIV laugh, and they're mostly about bourgeois with aristocratic pretensions.
And they didn't get it, so they say they didn't.
Well, they got it. There's nothing they could do about it. Louis XIV would be laughing his ass off. And of course, he didn't know that his grandson would eventually be executed by a bourgeois in the bourgeois revolution. But that's another story. So in order for a bourgeois to take over and destroy a feudal class, you can't have handicraft production. You need a factory production. And you need to, and another characteristic of classical feudalism is that most exchange is in kind. You 3 sheep for 2 horses. There is some currency, and there is currency manipulations more or less, but it's not the dominant form of exchange. Once everything is reduced to currency, it becomes the dominant form of exchange, which is, in other words, banking and finance capital become more important than exchange in kind, trading, I want like 6 bales of hay or wheat, and I will give you 2 swords or whatever, whatever you need, Like I said, and even in most of the feudal areas, there's high exploitation, and you pretty much in your role, like the feudal estate, one guy would make the plows and the horseshoes, and then everybody would farm. So they were pretty much self-sufficient. That had to be destroyed,
Now, how many people you calculate there was trapped in this industrial revolution system?
Billions.
In the billions.
Yeah.
And we're talking about an early 19th century?
We're talking about since Columbus came to the New World.
No, but the industrial revolution, like
But
you know
that's
when.
what financed it. See, that now we're going further. So you had a reduction. You had a switch to industrialization, a switch to finance capital, and then the third one is what they call primitive accumulation, which is also a characteristic of feudalism. And primitive accumulation is when you just go out and you steal something.
Mhm. So feudalism, how many people do you think were trapped in the feudal system in
Well,
comparison? I'm trying to make like because
well,
industrialization was like on steroids. Basically, it
well,
was able to
but
control a
see,
lot
we're
more
talking about
people.
development. It didn't just come about. So I'm giving you a longer view
I'm just
because
thinking about the
when you talk about
miserable people.
because when you talk about feudalism, there's Japanese were feudal, the Chinese were feudal,
Hmm.
Hindus were feudal. A lot of Native Americans would argue with a lot of the sociologists of the of Europeans
Hmm.
whether the Aztecs and the Incas were feudal.
No.
And everywhere feudalism didn't exactly operate with the same version of hierarchy. The Incas had their, like they had their own system where they would everybody, each nation they conquered was put in a special place. Sometimes they would take one nation and move it to another place just so it could be more dependent on the head Incas. But everybody had to grow crops or whatever, and they would take the crops, and the people that grew it they would divide all the crops into one third. One third went to the people that grew it and fed it. Another third would go to the Inca class, and then the final third would go into a collective granary in case there's an emergency. So the empire got so big, if there was a drought here, they could get the grain from there and help feed them.
Hmm.
And it was exploitative, but it was also an administrator. People knew their place. And I don't really know, I don't want to get into an argument whether it was or not, but you had all these differences. Japanese feudalism is very interesting in the sense that it almost mirrored exactly like British feudalism. And what's the fascinating part is they're both island nations at the end of their
Hmm.
continents,
And some people
surrounded
say
by
that that's why they got the atomic bomb,
what?
because they was very competitive, and they
Well,
was
we're
going
talking,
to
yeah, I'm
become
just
an
talking,
empire.
yeah,
They was
but
poised to become
well, when the
bigger than
Japanese
the British Empire.
yeah, but when the Japanese were feudal, they switched, they stayed, they didn't switch to capitalism till the 1860s, till the 1870s. And that was under the Meiji Restoration. They purposely understood that they had to modernize or become like China. And anyway, so the point I'm trying to
Hmm.
make is you
Hmm.
ask a question, how many people, like it's really hard to define on a worldwide scale because, like if you go into Rome, start out a sort of feudal, right? And it developed some of the preconditions for capitalism, but before it could develop into full capitalism, it crashed. It had finance capital, it had primitive accumulation. They went and conquered whoever they could, right? And they were starting to industrialize before they collapsed, right? So there was a setback. Then you went back into anarchy, and this is back to Europe. China had similar things under the, what is it? I think under the Ming, there was a chance for, was it the Ming? Yeah, there was a chance for China to go capitalist, but the emperors saw that if that capitalism would threaten their position, and they squashed it. They had like the Sea Party would go overseas. They
Hmm.
went up and down Africa and into India and stuff. And there was even some contacts with Europe. That's like with Marco Polo. So they purposely shut it down. You know, so when you're saying how many people were involved in this, I mean, most of history.
Compared to industrial revolution.
Well,
Because I have the feeling that the Industrial Revolution was like a lot more like
yeah, well, that speeded up
quick
things.
to capture people
Right. Well,
and
so in order to have the
without having them officially
but you
slaves.
don't just go into the industrial before you had the Industrial Revolution. You know, Europe by the time of the 16th century was no longer threatened by attacks from like the Mongols or the Turks or whatever. And even though they weren't, you know, the question is, why did Europe make the breakthrough as opposed to India was on its way to going capitalist too? But then Portuguese came up and sailed around and went into their fabric making. Textiles seemed to lead the way in development of capitalism. The Portuguese went there and just burned and wrecked everything and then subjugated them. So in order to develop industrial, you know, you had to get the surplus wealth from the other continents. So that's where the silver from Peru and the gold from Mexico and the conquest of Mexico and Peru and all this other stuff, you know, financed the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. The Caribbean was the major player, especially in England. It financed it through the sugar trade. Sugar capitalism was founded. You couldn't have the precursor to founding capitalism was to take the surplus wealth from these people, enslave Indians, practically cause the genocide, 100 million Native Americans, 100 million Africans, because then they try to replace the dead Native Americans with Africans. You know, I denounce all that. I'm just reporting it. Okay?
No. We have to listen. I have to listen to it. That's why I'm listening.
Right. So this is even before industrialization, or this is during industrialization, right? So you took the surplus wealth.
So that's why industrialization was so fast.
Well,
you know,
yeah,
it seemed like it was fast. When I was in school, they told me like, you know, just it. I got the impression whoever taught me that it was just like.
Let me talk, because the finance that started around the with the Italian banking states, and that was in the 14th and 15th centuries, right? That's under like the Medicis. They weren't Jews either. There was the Medicis, the Borgias, and there's all of these families. I'm not an expert in that period of history.
So that's where the
finance capital comes from, and then
for industrialization.
Yeah, and then the Germans. There was this famous family. I forgot it, what their name are. You know, these Germans.
I don't know much about them.
Yeah, well, also the Bourbons. Not the Bourbons, the Habsburgs. You know, Spain was run by the Habsburgs, and so was parts of Germany. You know, these two brothers. One brother was given the Holy Roman Empire, the other one was given Spain and the Netherlands, right? And somehow all that gold that Philip II took out of Mexico and all that wound up in the banks of the Habsburgs in Germany and Austria, right? That's pretty wild, right? So that started financing, and England kind of started catching up in 17th century. They started catching up. They were the ones that started making all these iron bridges and new investments. I think because what happened in Germany is, in order to start overthrowing the feudal system, they had the Civil War, the Peasant Wars. This was from when Martin Luther started creating Protestantism. So then a few years later, they had the 30 Years' War, in which Germany became a battleground for competing European armies.
What century was this, most or less?
This was the 16th century.
The 16th century.
1/3 of the entire population of Germany was killed.
So that was right after the so-called discovery of the Americas?
Yep. 1/3 of the entire population. And Germany wasn't even a country. It was a bunch of.
So Germany was fighting to get rid of feudalism.
No.
You say that. No? You just say that.
No, I said that's where it happened. There were German princes fighting. It was a class war. And Germany wasn't even a country then.
That's what I say. It was feudal. It was
Right. There was
feudalism.
different countries.
So they was trying to integrate.
No, the Swedes invaded, the Danes invaded, Russians invaded, so, all kinds of French invaded. You know, the Bourbons and the Habsburgs were duking out. All these other the Spaniards invaded, and they took Italians with them. Spain ran Italy, of large parts of Italy. So all of these people are fighting on German, and the German princes are divided amongst the different cliques and groups. Some became Lutheran, some became Calvinist, some stayed Catholic, and it created the treaty. I think it's the Treaty of Utrecht. Kind of
So what's Germany's birthday?
There's no birth. Oh well, you could say
They don't celebrate their birthday.
You can. I don't know when Bismarck unified them in 1871. That's when they officially became a country.
So from the 16, it was like almost 200 years fighting before they was able to.
No, they stopped. They signed this treaty and they stopped. Basically, there was all kinds of little wars here and there, but then the big war came when the French Revolution came and it started all over again. You know, France and all of these Habsburgs and wanted to keep them.
So while we're at it, why the British and the Germans don't get along? Is it true that's why they left the European Union? Because
this is modern history. I'm giving you other history.
Yeah, okay, but since we are back then, is that where the beef started with the?
Well, England always was sort of an outlier of the rest of Europe. You know, the English are Germans.
That's what I think. Is like why they.
But they're in denial of that.
Yeah, there's a lot.
The real thing is, it's not so much anti-German animosity.
Well, why they left the European Union?
Because they felt they could do better on their own.
Okay, I heard something.
Well, there's also a lot of it is anti-immigrant stuff because they don't want because the European Union has liberalization of refugees and stuff, and everybody in the European Union has to kind of obey that. So
it's like kind of Democrats and Republicans, kind of like.
I don't know. I didn't follow it that closely. I know, the right-wing version of Brexit is to keep all these immigrants out and to make sure that England has its own sovereignty and they're not suffering because the largest finance capitalists in Europe are the Germans, and the English wanted to come out of their shadow.
I didn't know that.
Now, the left-wing Brexit is, the European Union is a large financial and industrialized zone. So, Brexit is there to weaken it, to make sure that the capitalist class don't have solidarity with each other. It's harder because then there's a class politics and the ethnic politics, and communists and Marxists. And even you would think, but not always, anarchists are supposed to stick with class politics and whatever ethnic politics are, try to ameliorate that through good spirit by giving everybody a voice, by making sure that the people are treated with respect, that you don't think your cultural proclivities are the dominant one, the one that everyone should follow. You shouldn't be ashamed of yours. You should, like I'm a metalhead, right? But I don't expect everybody else to be one, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
when the problem. So right now, let's say we're in the Industrial Revolution.
So the Industrial Revolution started coming about around in England is where it really picked up steam, which is around the 1650s under Oliver Cromwell, when they started using iron to build bridges and all kinds of architectural things. And they were developing the loom. The Industrial Revolution, we're talking about handicraft production. Well, one of the things is clothing manufacture. When you're making a suit, you ever see, and even indigenous people have these looms where, they put the threads all there, and they have to do all of that by hand. So how long does it take to make just a whole bolt of fabric for a pair of clothes?
Well, for me, it would take years, but
But
for them, it's
yeah,
just
I'm
probably
talking about people who really know it.
days.
Yeah, who know what they're doing. Right, but that's just
Days.
one. They're doing all of this. They
Uh-huh.
know how to diet. You know, they can make very beautiful work, and there are people who do that because they like the handicraft of it. But realistically, you know, at one time, all of society was run by that. Most indigenous societies, when they made their textiles, that's how they did it, all by hand, you know, thread by thread,
Hmm.
you know. And there are people who, you know, you learn as a little kid. And by the time you're a teenager, you're pretty good, and by the time you're an adult, you're really good at it, you know. But still, how much? Even if you're the best in the whole world at it,
Yeah, you can
so
never provide.
so then they made the factory looms, is what led it, and that whole
So it
handicraft.
started first. Industrialization started with fabrics,
I don't know if it started. You know, you can.
but
Yeah,
that's
that's one of the things it did.
mhm.
You know, I mean, that was the fabrics. If you look at the old movies and they talk about they're all making cloth and everything, and that's why they had to conquer India for the cotton and other stuff. Plus, India, they conquered it for the surplus. Well, because that's another story. The Maharajas were all about tax farming. And when the British came, they didn't disrupt the system. They just transferred who gets the end result from the local people, the local exploiters to the international exploiters. You know, there's local exploiters and internationalist exploiters. Somehow nationalism expects us to choose one or the other. I denounce not local exploiters and I denounce international
Of
exploiters.
course,
And when they say,
of course,
oh, if
it's
the
like
China
what?
takes over, well, is their bourgeois any worse than ours? Who the hell knows? Maybe, maybe not. But I don't want them to take over but I don't want our own bourgeois to take over either.
No, it's kind of like we're going back to the feudal fear mongering.
Right,
You know, it's just like if you're not with us, then we don't know what's going to happen to you.
right,
It's just like
right. But meanwhile, they both act the same. So,
you still got water?
no, I got it. Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
so
So, that started when they started making the looms and everything, the industrial looms, the Arkwright, I think, that came like late in the 17th and early 18th centuries. They were making these iron bridges and this canal system, and
so who was this gentleman again?
I don't know. I think it's
No, you
Arkwright or something, and they
Arkwright.
were trying to make it. You know, they were forcing people off the land to put them in the factories because nobody wanted to go in those factories.
Oh, that's what they did in Latin America.
Yeah, well, of course.
Everybody had
Well,
to abandon the fields.
They replicated because capitalism.
And recently in Mexico, we used to have it's still in
Ejido.
the 70s. We used to have farmers,
Yeah, the Ejido
and
system.
now it's just
Right, NAFTA purposely destroyed that. So usually when they look at the enclosures in England and Germany, you know, that was back then. They look at it as ancient history, but you are totally correct when you're saying that process may not be going on in Europe or the United States anymore, but it's going on in Mexico. It's going on whenever there's indigenous people running around, you know, supporting
the
themselves.
precious land.
And then we're giving them jobs. Well, fuck your jobs, you know. First of all, would you rather work in the maquiladora zone surrounded by toxins with the femicide and all, or say you work on your own ejido? You can explain what the ejidos are.
It's a
communal
piece of land. It's just a communal land.
It's a communal land where
everybody
each
put in work like
yeah.
4 or 5 months out of the year, you know,
and you may not
share the crop.
Yeah, you may not become rich, but at least you have plenty of time to
But
sing
you have
and dance.
Pesticide free, which is a luxury right now.
Right.
And some of the people, they're still holding on to their own seeds because now it's getting to that point that it's almost impossible to get seeds that are not GMO or some other weird stuff put in those seeds.
And that's the other thing, you know, like, so Marxism really starts out as a critique of capitalism, because when Marx and Engels were alive, Marx was born in, I think, 1818, May 5th, right after Napoleon was died, like shortly after. And you still had feudalism in Prussia, which is Eastern Germany, Western Poland. You still have feudalism in parts of Italy and parts of and Russia, like huge millions of people. And you still had the remnants of feudalism in Western Europe. It was a period of transition, right? So they're living in a period where the bourgeois is rising. They had the French Revolution, and there was, of course, a reaction and some kind of restoration of semi-feudalism, but not really. But you still had the actual system in other countries, and Germany's right next to, surrounded by all of them. So they got to see this. You got to see the rise of the bourgeois and the old system simultaneous. So you put two and two together. Oh, how does this happen? And so, and they knew the recent history. I mean, the French Revolution, if you're in 18, your Marx was like 10 years old in 1830. There were still people who lived through the French Revolution. It still went, they were like old people. Maybe you were like 10, in 1891, right? So you'd be like 40 in the 1830s, right?
Yeah.
So these people, they saw there was a huge paradigmic shift within many people's own lifetime. The feudal era was destroyed, one that lasted since the collapse of the Roman Empire. Well, really, or the consolidation, the Holy Rome under Charlemagne, 800. So we're talking about 1,000 years, more or less, and something, if you were there in the 1750s, you'd think the royalty would always be there. Just like in the U.S., if you were alive in the United States in 1858, chances are you'd think slavery would always be there. Then what happens? Civil War. 3 years later, Emancipation Proclamation, and the whole thing is over. Like these slow buildups can lead to, that's another quantitative change, lead to qualitative change. There was a critical mass. The whole country was at war. Next thing you know, one of the synthesis of the war, the slaves are freed.
Yeah, don't talk to me about change, because I think I was like 10 when they brought in our first television set.
Right. Okay. So.
And I was like, "What is that?
So
what
you're saying,
that?"
yeah, you're saying.
And now it's like, what the hell is television? It's like,
well, the whole.
You got a tablet, you got an iPhone or something,
Right, but there's also that stuff strengthened the power of the bourgeois.
I'm still a radio girl all the way. You can tell that the radio is so loud.
That's cool.
But it's just kind of like it's. I used to fall asleep with the radio under my pillow.
Yeah.
And then my parents, they had to come and they said, "You're gonna go crazy. You're gonna go nuts." But there was something about the radio that
Okay.
that I still love, and it's so direct, and it could be our salvation, because it's so easy, if you
it could also be our hell,
if you're able
Hitler
to
used the radio to come to power.
Really.
Yeah.
That was the right. But then let's not skip. So
I mean, everything is a double-edged sword. You have to have the consciousness to use it properly. I like the radio too.
I like radio because it's the word. I mean,
Right.
I'm not a good reader. That's one, and still you don't get the intonations, all that stuff that you hear from a voice.
Well, you
so
can.
much you can get from a voice. So, but anyway, so feudalism is dead-ish.
Well, it still survives in certain parts of the world.
Yeah, still have powerful lords.
Yeah, the drug lords.
Well, yeah, that's
and
true.
then these people, some of them, there's still slavery here and there. There's still like in part,
slavery, yes, but
on the peonage, peons in Mexico.
Hmm.
I mean, that kind of ended with the Mexican Revolution,
Kind of. I
but it's
mean,
still there in some places, right?
yeah. I mean, it's a whole process of
So,
decolonization of the mind.
right.
There's
Well,
still people they like to work for somebody instead of like that was the worst. That was the worst part. That they normalized this
right.
idea of you growing up and getting a job. Why? Why does that have to be?
Because it serves the rich, the
Of
ruling class.
course, of course. And it's like, yeah, I'm gonna get the best job, but it's still gonna be a job, and you still can get fired whenever they want to.
Right.
They take huge taxes and everything, and you don't
Well, look
see.
at Upton Sinclair's The Jungle.
I don't know.
The Jungle was this famous novel written by this guy in Upton Sinclair about the meatpacking industry in Chicago in the 1910s.
Well, we're skipping.
No, but this
You want to do
applies
it
to
now?
what,
Okay,
yeah,
okay,
this applies to what you say. The whole,
okay.
I'm recommending if anyone's watching this, is The
Alton
Jungle,
Sinclair,
Upton,
Upton Sinclair, The
the
Jungle.
Jungle, because it led to the reform of the meatpacking laws because it's about a Polish immigrant that he's young, he immigrates to the U.S., the land of opportunity, and he goes into these stockyards in Chicago, which is where they used to, well, the final place where they'd herd all the cattle, then they'd butcher them or pigs and turn them into meat, which this is the industrialization of food. And Chicago was the jumping because it's in the Midwest, and then they would ship a lot of it east or wherever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he feels like, he sees an old person who was all broken down, and as a young man, he has contempt for him because, he's just weak minded. I'll overcome the system, right? I'll get a good job, become rich, and then the novel eventually, through labor stripes, he sees the ridiculousness of his early stances, and then he becomes like the old guy. He becomes a revolutionary because it no longer made sense. He saw the exploitation. And unless people are told they're being exploitative and offered a different vision, a different way, they don't know better. I call that this provincialism. I was talking about temporal provincialism. When you only know your own time, you cannot relate to the past. You don't have any vision of the future. You think, it's always going to be like this. I mean, it's always going to be, and it always was. There's no change.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm meeting, I meet all kinds of people, Latinos in the Bronx,
Mm-hmm.
that don't know that Spain owned Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, and that's why they speak Spanish.
Are you serious?
I'm telling you, and these are good people, but the school system is so horrible that like stuff that we may take for granted is major revelations to them. So they can't even envision like someone in the 16th century getting on a wooden boat, coming here, like they just think a ship and airplane and everything. And what does that mean in terms of our own revolution in the U.S., right? With the 13 colonies, if you really look at it, this is temporal provincialism. If you want to erase it, think about this, that from Florida to Maine is the same size as England and France put together. Now, England had a population of about 7.8 million back then, and the 13 colonies had about 2.5 or 2.2, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
They had maybe 3 times as many people. But think of the communications. You're a colonial administrator. You need to contact the mother country. You write a letter. You give it to the sailor. He takes it on the boat, brings it to England. They read it. That takes like a month and a half.
Yeah.
2 months, and maybe if they're lucky, like 5 weeks. They read it, comment, give it to the guy going back, and think of all the troop movements and how that worked and what did that mean. So in some sense, now we can dominate populations much bigger than us because we have air transplant, or because we have this strike force. Like if something pops up that threatens the imperial regimes, we have these. We can, first of all, we know instantly. They don't have time to build a base, or they don't have time to propagandize or start riots or create an army. We send these guys in, the strike force guys in on the plane, start blowing crap up. I mean, the response from 2 or 5 months to literally hours.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that
hours.
doesn't mean this system can't be overthrown. But I'm saying, just thinking in those terms, and what it also means for me is the dialectical process operates on us as individuals, how we respond to the environment and how the environment responds to us. And if you're in this world where all you know is your own block and the sidewalks and the trees, and you never really been anywhere, maybe you have relatives in a different country, you may visit them once or twice or whatever, but basically you live in this system. Take one of those people and put them in the woods or something, even just for a night on a camping trip with friends. I'm not saying abandon them, let them loose, or you put a parachute. I'm just saying, take them, just sit, like just being in a different mind space when you're surrounded by nature. The trees and the grass and the animals and all of that. We're part of a biosphere, and the biosphere has all kinds of conscious energy that flows from us into them. Most Eurocentric Marxists will deny that, but to me, I'm a Marxist and I don't deny that. And so because the Eurocentric Marxists tend to only care about industrialization as the sole salvation. In other words, they came up with this theory that in order to solve the problem, you got to create surplus. If you have a bunch of surpluses, then no one needs to go hungry, and then there's no need to have a hierarchy, So everything was based on industrialization. But then, of course, later on, we realized industrialization itself requires hierarchies because you have to organize people in the work teams. And
So might as well let's talk about the Soviet Union.
Yeah, okay.
Is that what you're talking about? Is that what you was thinking about?
Well, that's
because that it was implemented. A lot of Marxism was implemented in the Soviet Union.
Lenin,
right?
Lenin and Stalin
with incredible success. Right?
They were Marxists.
Mm-hmm.
So they followed. See all of this stuff with dialectics, Marx. Europeans dropped out of that. There was a worldwide understanding of it, but Europeans got alienated from that with, Christianity and all that garbage, But so
you was just telling me before you arrived. You told me on the phone about Aristide in Haiti, that he only built 2 public schools and something like that.
Our ruling
and he got kidnapped, right?
Yeah, our ruling class. It's not a question of even economics.
So how the Soviet Union did it? Because they did not just build 2
they had
schools. They had a whole system in place.
Because they also had a 3 million man army, and they had nuclear weapons, and so
Evo Morales did not.
He doesn't have that, and
they don't have a military academy.
Well, they send all their troops to train here. Their academy is
here
trained
in Chile. Can you imagine?
Well,
that's suicidal. How are you going to train your enemy? Allow train your military.
Well, if you really,
and we saw the results. They sit on their asses. If you're really
going to get it, no Latin American country even needs an army.
What do you mean?
Well, why do you need an army? Because there's been 3 or 4 wars between Latin American countries in the last 2 years, last 15 years.
But do you think
And
Venezuela still be standing, if standing-ish?
well, the thing is, there's only one real enemy that threatens them, and that's the United States. Remember, Colombia and Venezuela had a little mini war. Was there any real danger of one country taking over the other?
Well, I don't
No. The
think
most
so.
they can do is send like underground people to blow shit up, but they cannot.
Yeah, but
Colombia
Colombia
cannot.
is acting on behalf of the United States.
That's right. That's right. But without U.S. aid, Colombia cannot take over Venezuela. Venezuela cannot take over Colombia.
Venezuela could.
No, they
Because now
can't.
they have the military for it.
So if they invade, then
And they should.
we
Well, right now the United States got 8
all right,
military bases in
put it,
Colombia.
no, let me
so
put it this way.
it won't be
The
pretty.
United States could not even take over Afghanistan.
Yeah, but that's different language. It's so
Doesn't
far
matter.
away.
Latin Americans can fight too. The United States, the Russians at one time had 500,000 guys in Afghanistan. The Afghanistan resistance never had more than 50,000 guys, 10 to 1. And the Russians, they were kind of winning because they have a border, you know. The supply lines, if you know anything about military, everything is supply lines, you know. They had a border with it, this and that. So they had them under control. But then, when we caused problems and that whole thing with arming the Taliban and making it hard and kicking the Soviets out, then we go there to kick the Taliban. We had 250,000 guys there. Our supply lines are from the U.S. Of course, we have way stations in the Middle East and everything. To there, you got to keep them armed with bullets. That's why it's expensive. The most fighters the Taliban ever had on us is like 30 to 40,000. Really, they averaged about 20,000, and we still couldn't take them over. We still haven't totally pacified Iraq. Basically we pacify them through paying everybody off. But if we didn't pay them off, and that country was all shattered. Syria, we sent guys. China in 1979 invaded Vietnam. China has 10 times as many people as Vietnam. They couldn't take over Vietnam. Venezuela can't take over Colombia. Colombia can't take over. Peru and Ecuador had a war recently over a little. Was there any danger of one country actually taking over another country, like Germany taking over France in World War II? Think about it. These armies.
I don't know.
They're there for.
I mean, you got a lot of evidence there, but I don't know. I don't know what to say.
They can't take over each other.
Never say never.
Well, no, I was in Jackson Heights then when that happened. I'm on Roosevelt Avenue. I'm in the bar, Spanish bar, and there's all these Peruvians and Ecuadorians in there, right? And the news is talking about the war. They're all drinking. Not one of them is paying attention. And you say, well, what about the war? It's a bunch of garbage. There's no way. Blah, blah, blah. But 2 weeks later, what happens? Soccer match between the two.
Oh.
Now they're really upset.
I know.
And they don't intend to take over. They just want to beat each other. There's, all of a sudden, that's it. We don't, But and there's regional chauvinisms. Latin America certainly isn't homogeneous. But most of these Latin American armies are solely there to oppress their own troops. Which is a country that has the highest standard of living per capita, the median? Costa Rica. Why? No military. They're the one country that didn't have the oppression.
But it is just like, I mean, I'm thinking about it, and you're right. I mean, in today's time, it happened the way it's happening to Palestine.
They
go little by little, and that's why everybody need a military, because that they take let's take a 6 feet over here, that the border is a little bit
Yeah,
Next
but
thing
see,
you know,
no, Palestine
this is the way it happened today.
yeah, but Palestine doesn't have the same, is not nearly as big as as Colombia or Venezuela or Mexico. Mexico has 120,000 million people. Nobody, the U.S. can't even take over. We can invade and we can take over the capital, but we're not going to be able to.
That's enough. That's enough to bleed the whole country.
There'd be a guerrilla warfare. The people rise up. The guerrilla warfare, the U.S. occupation.
Without peace, there's nothing. So.
And not only that, millions of U.S. citizens will be pissed at that and do everything they can to undermine the occupation. There's no way.
Lately, you cannot predict.
You can't
predict.
Know
what is going on. Especially right now, with the smoke screen of the impeachment, people are like.
So you think U.S. is going to invade?
Anyway. It's not going to be the same sense that.
Well, no, now imperialism is based on finance capital.
But they'll find ways. Look how fast it happened in Bolivia.
Right.
And the whole media was like, they not even tell us about these characters. They not even tell us nothing until it happened.
Because there's always there's always a comprador class. There's always parts of these. Comprador is someone in a subjugated country that works with the imperialists. That is an agent. The only reason Evo Morales is overthrown is because traitors within his own country, and because even though the Bolivian army, their West Point may be in Chile, they're also trained by the U.S. School of the Americas, and they are integrated into the U.S. military. There's a whole big thing where these guys come to the U.S. and they start buying. The first thing they do is take all the drug money they earn and put it in the bank. They do some money laundering, right? Then they go shopping for all the luxury. And then the whole thing is that they want to be part of the developed world. And it's also their class consciousness is also tied up in race consciousness because they think they're white. And Evo Morales is an Indian. And so they want to emulate the U.S. even in the suburbias and its McDonald's and all of that, because that's seen as being part of the developed world.
But the racial aspect comes from from self-determination.
Right. Well, but they don't have that.
And when people have been, for centuries denied self-determination, it's just like there's no way that
well, most Bolivians
that you can talk about justice or equality or anything. In our country, indigenous people, they live worse than.
Right, but most countries, these people have that self-determination, but it's only suppressed.
No, we talk about a country, but in the country, this is what the part that Bolivia got right. They rectify their name to a plurinational state of Bolivia, and that's what it is. This is where we are. We're in the Anáhuac. We're in the Anáhuac from Alaska to Nicaragua, which literally means until here Anáhuac. That's what it means. So this was the territory of Anáhuac. This was it is still called, because I don't recognize these geographical divisions, and to have self-determination, you have to have land, you have to have peace, you have to not be running away in the hills, not have to deny.
But there's
and learn another language. All these stuff that come in effect. It's not racism. It is survival.
Right, but it is a class of traitors within your country,
of course,
that don't identify with their own people, that don't identify with the indigenous people.
They do identify with us. It's just that
they've
been bamboozled. They've been hypnotized. They usually recruited, like Juan Guaido and all these characters. They get recruited from very early age.
Right, but they also come from money. So Juan Guaido his family is bourgeois. He's not a campesino.
Not all of the traders are come
No,
from money.
but the ones who are actually running the country do. And then they get all these other poor people that sign up for it. They sign up for the military, or maybe they get their own small businesses. And then
Anyway,
that group is not even homogeneous. Some are traders and some aren't. So
I have
like Venezuela, Chavez came from the military. He was one of them, but he was never a trader.
Mhm.
But a lot of them are.
Mhm.
Guaido is a trader, and your class origin often define your ideological outlook, whether you're for or against imperialism. And a lot of people they're more afraid of communism than being dominated by an economic giant. In fact, a lot of them, not all, I said a lot, want to be dominated because they make money themselves. They get their own position. You get to be the president of your country if you cooperate. What's one of the first things most Latin American presidents have to do when they get elected?
What most what?
Most Latin American presidents have to do when they get elected. They get on a plane and they fly to Washington and they consult with our president.
Oh, that's true.
When does one of our presidents get elected and then fly to their country, fly to Mexico to consult with the Mexican president?
I don't know. I don't follow that.
And never.
I was never into politics until Lopez Obrador.
Okay,
It's
but
the first time I voted.
all right.
50,
Congratulations.
53 I was when I voted.
Okay.
The first time. It was disgusting.
Well, I've been doing politics for like 50 years.
Mhm.
Not 50.
So I have a burning question, and hopefully you can answer shortly, but it might not.
Yeah.
What did the Soviet Union did wrong?
Oh, well, the Soviet Union, they were a major threat to capitalism. And because they were a major threat, the capitalists did whatever they could to destroy them.
But how was there like
Well, Hitler was all about destroying the Soviet
conquering?
Union.
Was it conquering lands? Was they acquiring lands?
Oh.
Or the Soviet Union? Why
No,
was it
because Russia before the revolution was a stooge. Like the French had financed it, and the Germans had financed its industries, and they were getting the cheap food, cheap everything. They were keeping Russia a peasant country. Russia was having a little bit of development, but their national bourgeois was subordinate to foreign bourgeois.
You're talking about right after the Tsars.
Well, that's
after
the
the
Tsars.
Tsars.
No, that was during the Tsars.
Oh, during the Tsars.
So the Bolsheviks spent a week after the revolution, spent a week trying to work with the bourgeois, but they wouldn't cooperate. So they nationalized. They took over all the factories, and they were hoping to spread the revolution to other countries. So what the Soviet Union did wrong
that's an enemy of capitalism.
Right. And so what the Soviet did wrong was that they became obsessed with their own survival to the point where they became paranoid and created a police state, because they were afraid, and rightfully so, that if they didn't protect the revolution, they would be overthrown. Because in 1919, as you may or may not know, the capitalist countries, even after World War I, unified and invaded the Soviet Union and exacerbated their civil war. They had a 3-year civil war after that. So Austria, the U.S.
How long?
They had a 3-year civil war.
Oh, 3. I thought you said 300.
No, 3 years.
3-year.
Civil war after that. And then when the rest of the world didn't go communist, because the next domino was supposed to be Germany. And Germany came this close to being communist, but their revolutionaries all failed. They were stabbed in the back by class collaborators within Germany. They were stabbed in the back not by Jews, but by Ebert and Scheidemann, by idiots who misused, who fell for all the tricks of the bourgeois. But there was a genuine revolutionary upsurge in which sailors and army guys were ready to to institute a bourgeois, a communist revolution similar to what Lenin did. So you have to separate Lenin. So through a series of mishaps or whatever, Stalin winds up in control, and Stalin was a paranoid. He, his prehistory of before the revolution, he was one of the few Bolsheviks leadership that stayed in the Tsarist Empire.
What does Bolshevik mean? So the people that might remember, this is Communism 101.
Okay, Bolshevik means it majoritarian. It was the Russian Social Democratic Party from 1903 to 1917. And the Social Democratic Party were, at the time, the leftists. They were the anarchists, Marxists. They were all considered one group, but there was different tendencies in it. So Lenin's tendency was to create a group, a vanguard party of committed professional revolutionaries that would dedicate their lives to it. Whereas the opposite of Bolshevik was Menshevik. They were the minoritarians. And their view was to take over through parliamentary means. But see, the Bolshevik, and they was the international party.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1903, Lenin split them. And in the conference, the Bolsheviks were the majority in that little conference. So he called themselves, even though really they were the minority. So it was a split in the tendencies. And the Bolshevism comes out of Tsarist Russia was 10 times more oppressive than Kaiserine, the Kaiser's Germany. They were simultaneous. Or the English, They were oppressive. The Kaiser, up until 1880, had the anti-socialist law. And then the Germans were a lot rougher. But once that was
Who came out with that law?
Bismarck.
Bismarck.
Otto von Bismarck. And the Kaiser. The Kaiser was...
So Germany outlawed socialism. Communism.
Socialist. Well, they didn't call themselves communists up until 1917 because they were all socialists, but they figured now we had the socialists, and the next stage after socialism was communism, so they were going to work towards communism, right? But you had to take over the means of production. You had to take over the factory. You had to get rid of the bourgeois in order to institute a socialist system. You can't have socialism and the bourgeois. They don't really get along side by side because the bourgeois has felt all kinds of entitlements and are aggressive towards anything. They're predatory. Their whole thing is anytime you can make a buck, they're going to find a way to do it.
Yeah, definitely. They consider...
So the Bolsheviks was the underground party of Lenin that eventually led the revolution, which just happened recently, in November of 1917, where 102 years passed, and then
it's not 17, it's about to happen, the anniversary.
Right.
And ours is November 20th.
Right. That's
we were first.
1911, the men of Ayala.
It was 1910.
I'm sorry. I bow to your
that's
expertise.
That's what I know. That I'm Mexican. If I don't know the Mexican Revolution, I thought it was 1910, but you might be.
No, I read some stuff on it. I still have to concretize it a little bit more. But
I didn't know there was both in November.
Yeah, well, maybe the astrologically. I don't know if you believe in that stuff.
I do. Of course, even if you don't believe it, you're like.
No, whatever. But it happened for whatever reason. They both shared the same month, and the Mexican.
Look at Evo got ousted in November.
Right, because there is a class, the ruling class in Bolivia. Most of them didn't like Evo Morales. And it's based on class. They own the means of production. They want to make sure that continues. They don't want any threat to that, and they want to expand into the public sector. And the only people willing to help them are U.S. imperialism. So they work hand in hand, And these people are willing to sell out their country. And even though Evo Morales at times sold out his country too, it wasn't nearly as bad. Evo
Like
Morales,
what policies you criticize the most?
um, he didn't really like institute a socialist state. If you understand where he came out of the Cocolero movement. I'm against the drug war. In fact, I love pot. I smoke. I'm an anti-drug war activism is one of my primary focuses. But the Cocolero movement was petty bourgeois, small landholders who the only way they can make any money and survive as a bourgeois was to sell cocaine. They're up in these mountains. They try to sell bananas, but by the time the banana got to the market, they were rotten. All the fruit that the United States told them to sell wasn't feasible. The only profitable crop,
coca leaves.
the coca leaves. Another characteristic that separates capitalism from feudalism is that in feudalism, most of the production is for local consumption. In capitalism, it's based on commodity. A commodity is something you produce to be sold, right? So it doesn't matter what you produce, you just want the money. So you can produce any old garbage. You can produce uranium. If someone's willing to buy it, they'll produce it.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the problems with capitalism is that, and then even the indigenous, they take indigenous products like coca leaves are actually good for you, and in its natural state has numerous health benefits, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, German chemists take it and reduce it to cocaine. This is in the 1870s. And you know who was the first big time promoter of cocaine?
I guess Freud.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
he prescribed. He prescribed it.
Use a cocaine.
Yeah.
No, I don't really care. I'm
Well,
not being moralistic
I heard
that.
about a theory about with Europe that he was really determined to find another route to India or whatever.
Freud?
No. I'm talking about
Columbus?
Spain.
Oh, Spain. Columbus?
Yeah, Columbus and all that
Magellan?
stuff because of the sugar. You ever heard that one?
Yeah.
They got really hooked on sugar.
Yeah, well, that if you want to go to origins,
the original fentanyl.
Yes. Well, we kind of touched on that. If you really want to get into it, a real
They was looking for a fix.
Yeah, well, I'm not arguing. I'm saying a great book on that is by the Trinidadian ex-president and scholar Eric Williams. He wrote From Columbus to Castro, A History of the Caribbean.
Okay, From Columbus to Castro, people look it up.
By A History of the Caribbean by Eric Williams. And basically it talks about how Europe got the surplus wealth it needed in order to have the imperial, in order to initiate capitalism, to overthrow mercantilism, was through sugar, and especially from Jamaica. The sugar barons became the primary bourgeois rulers in England. In fact, there's all kinds of history involved. But it wasn't only sugar. Yes, you're right. But what are the other things? Tea, coffee, slavery.
Yeah, of course that's money, but when you get, you've seen how people they like. We used to have facilitate groups for transsexual women, and we tried to take the soda out.
Right.
And they was they almost let in arms. If you don't bring us the 3 liter whatever bottles of soda, they was going to.
This is one of my own little personal observations.
Can live without soda.
Personal observations that everyone ignores, but I find amusing in a sad way. That capitalism was built on sugar, slavery, coffee, tobacco, and rum. Right? Alcohol, all things that are killing us now. Its very origins was toxic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and now when you're trying to do it now, it's illegal. You're going to jail.
Yeah, exactly.
But when they did it, it was like
fine.
It was great. It was great. It was like And now it's just like just selling Lucy's, like Eric Garner.
You
They're
know,
selling Lucy's, and they kill him for selling
and
Lucy's.
they toxified tobacco, because tobacco, if you just grow the leaf and did it the way the indigenous, it wasn't nearly. Now I heard there's like 36 or 60 additives to it, including
I heard it was 1,000.
I don't know, whatever it is, including shards of aluminum, and you're smoking that, and then you're highly
Wow.
addicted, and they actually manipulate the nicotine. The way they do it, if you know your psychology, do you know about reinforcement schedules and behaviorism? In other words, they get a rat, right? And in order to get a reward, like a pellet of food, it has to tap
The
a
rat come at the same time?
No, listen.
Oh.
It has to press a button, and it presses it 3 times, and it gets a pellet.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's how they train the rat. So every 3 times it gets a pellet. So it knows that it's going to get a pellet. So they call that a fixed reinforcement. You're reinforcing a behavior through this kind of fixed thing. Now,
so that's what the commercials do.
No, so listen to this. This is what the tobacco companies did. So the other version of reinforcement is variable. So the rat doesn't know how many times it has to push the button before it gets the food pellet. So it could push it 3, 1, 100. When it's hungry, it's not stopping. And even then, it starts worrying about when its next meal, so it's more likely to start pressing it again. So variable reinforcement schedules are more likely to lead to addiction. So what the tobacco companies did is I don't know if they still do this, I don't smoke, but I imagine they do. In every pack of cigarettes, they manipulated the level of nicotine.
Let me get you some more water.
Here.
What time you gotta run?
Well, I'm gonna go in a few minutes if it's okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I'm enjoying myself. But
yeah. So what do you want to talk about?
Well,
talk to them while I get your
finish
water.
the story. Yeah, but
Oh yes, continue while I get your water. I can hear you.
Okay, so they manipulate what gets people addicted to cigarettes is nicotine. So, and it's what, you shoot the nicotine and whatever, it's why you smoke cigarettes. And so they manipulate the amount of nicotine in each cigarette. Like most cigarettes have a low amount of nicotine, but there's always 2 or 3 supercharged cigarettes with nicotine in it.
In a pack?
Yes. So you smoke the cigarette, and if you get a low one, then you're going to smoke it again until you get a supercharged one. Then you get the supercharged one. You're like, and then it wears off. You want the supercharged one, so you keep going through until you hit.
I think I told you I was in programs. They programs, daycare, and they said
Thank you.
They kicked. You're welcome. They kicked heroin, crack, but not cigarettes.
Well,
they cannot kick cigarettes. They all.
Well, that's one of the things they did.
10 packs of cigarettes a week.
When we legalized marijuana, which I'm for.
Yeah, I'm not listening. Just these guys are
we don't want them to manipulate the THC levels so that they continue the same.
You better say that again.
We don't want them
that's coming.
Right. We don't want them to manipulate the THC levels, the psychoactive component of cannabis, and turn it into something that is a benign, happy subject into something that's addictive, and continue our neurotic relationship with what should be just people smoke when they want to, don't smoke when they don't,
Mm-hmm.
So
well, that's why I believe it should be decriminalized.
No, legalized, not even legalized. We want to remove all references of cannabis from the legal system.
Oh. Then what do you mean? That
we want them to take out all the laws they have now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And replace them with laws that actually protect us, such as no manipulating the THC, No pesticides.
Well, if they just allow us to do it in our house
Yeah, well, we want a lot of
and to
homegrown.
trade our own seeds
Well,
before they.
we want homegrown. But see, I'm a cannabis activist. The forces behind it don't want homegrown.
Okay, so you're a cannabis activist. What is it? What is it? The Kush? What is it? The purple haze?
Those are just not those. It's like,
Is it synthetic? Is it poisonous? Or is it
no.
like, because I hear so many things
From who?
From everybody. They say that the purple haze is laced with something.
No.
That's how they like, or they put like.
Well, see, that's the thing. There's different strains of cannabis. It's all over the world. There's two basic strains, indica and sativa. And indica is from, I think, this hemisphere, and sativa is from the other one. And it's a very complex plant, and from one generation to the next, it's constantly changing. It very rarely is exact clones of each other when it so you get all these strains, and people figure, well, they look at this strain and they say, oh, well, they artificially name it purple haze, and then it gives you a certain kind of high, and then they purposely separate all this stuff so they can market it. It's all packaging. Now, there's some deeper stuff. You can manipulate it in the sense where people who are dishonest criminals,
Mhm.
when these people can put artificial stuff in it to emulate the natural high, but if there's a whole group of people that grow it themselves and then cross to get it, and the hydroponic movement, and they get so good at it, they can actually get high levels of THC, but it's still natural pot. Now, the second thing that's going on is they're international seed sellers, Sensi Seed being one of them. And my friend told me that Sensi Seeds is GMO.
What kind of seeds?
Sensi Seeds is a company.
Sensi.
Yeah, it's a company in Holland. They sell. You can call them up, or you can send them an email. You pay, and they mail you seeds over, say, to your house. And they have safety protocols. It's illegal in this country, but I don't know how it works.
But you said they're already genetically modified.
Well, that's for my
to produce a lot more, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's my friend, because when you pot, you want pot without seeds, which is like the seeds. There's pot, marijuana, cannabis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Has male and female plants.
Mm-hmm.
And the female plants are a lot more potent than the male plants, but it could be hermaphrodite in the sense that females can change to males and back and forth. But you have to be a good cultivator to know how to do that. And if you have no seeds, if all you grow is sensimilla, seedless,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right, then how are you going to keep it going? So you have to have some seeds in some of your plants,
mm-hmm.
Whereas you can take the special ones and separate them and create them. And in fact, the female plant, I'm not an expert in growing. The female plant produces the THC, comes off as sort of a tar kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And under certain conditions, wanting the seed from the male will actually increase its THC level. And that's natural. That's like indigenous. I mean, how did the indigenous
mm-hmm. people
get corn from teosinte? I mean,
mm-hmm.
I don't mind if people are just doing it all by hand, but if you're literally using high technology to remove a gene from one plant to another, or theoretically they could make cocaine, cannabis, poppy seed hybrids through genetically modified, and you know what that would do.
Oh God, don't even.
So the laws we want on the book when they have cannabis is, one, allow people to grow their own as much as they want, provided they don't. You could trade for it. You can't sell it. If you're going to sell it, you should be taxed, right? And not at high levels, the tax rate shouldn't be more than other products. Okay, so you want a liberal homegrown thing where people could grow 99, 100 plants, whatever.
Hmm.
And really, if you grow that much, woohoo, think of the parties we would have.
Can you imagine? But the world will be better,
Yeah,
in a way, because the thoughts are a little slower.
Right.
People are not like racing.
Right.
How can people contact you? How can I?
You got my phone
If
number.
anybody but anybody who watched the video and said like
let me.
they want to book you or something.
They can contact. You can be my agent.
Okay, through me.
Contact Brooke.
Okay.
If you really need me.
All right.
Because you could sift it through.
So then I let you hear. And well, you gotta come back because I mean we haven't even scratched the surface. We were just talking about how the biggest struggle it was to end feudalism and all these
I brought this book.
Lords.
I only read some of it.
What? I hope it's not coming backwards.
It's coming backwards.
What's the name of the book? You remember?
Okay.
Because we cannot read it over there.
Studies in the Development of Capitalism by Marie Staub. Now, these are like little essays on how, the origins of the bourgeois, and you need industrialization. Remember, Europe, like every other continent, was a process, I mean, it had huge setbacks in development after the collapse of the Roman Empire. It took 1,000 years for them to equal the Romans' engineering skills with the first cathedrals, right? Or 900 years, whatever it was. And then, it was turned into a Mediterranean centered with huge Mediterranean focus with huge urban centers into basically Afghanistan, a rural society run by religious fanatics.
Wow.
And so the bourgeois had to rise through that. And as we said before, the feudalism came out of self-protection, I mean, at one time, Europeans were a tribal people, right? You know that.
Yes, of course.
So all these tribes moving in from Central Asia, man, there was numerous waves, but the last waves were Turkic people. In other words, Attila the Huns, and there were a few others. And the last Turkic, well, you had the Mongols in the 13th century, and the last was the Ottoman Empire, stopped in 1450s when they took over. So not soon after, they stopped at the gates of Vienna or something like that.
What year was that again?
I don't remember. You got to look it up.
Yeah,
and then these Germans came there. They came there. The Vandals, the Goths, the Anglos, the Saxons.
Is that where the Hazards? Khazars or Hazards? How do you pronounce that? I was
Khazars.
reading the other day about the Khazars.
The Khazars, no one knows where they came from.
No one knows? I thought that's not what I read. But
what
again,
did you read?
I don't know. I don't remember.
The Khazars were these warrior people. Maybe I'm getting them mixed up. They were these warrior people on the Central Plains, and they were they were known since Alexander the Great's time. In the 4th century BC. All the way up to modern times, where they kind of disappeared. They were like nomads. They were great warriors, and if you had like a feudal army, is mainly a lot of infantry, can't chase them down on foot, and
No, but what I mean, that was a part of the groups that came.
Yeah, they were there. They were all mixed. They were all mixed in Eastern Europe.
But there was no Ottoman. There was no.
Yeah, there was Ottoman.
The Khazars was not from the same people as the Ottoman.
Well, see, they might have been. I don't know if they were Turkic people. They don't know what they were. There's this thing called language groups. And the Turkic language groups produce like the Mongols, modern Turkish, and then there's all these like Turkestan and Uzbekistan, all the stands. You know, they were basically the Turkish language groups, the numerous ones, and the Indo-Aryan language groups were like the Germans, the Germanic ones, Latins, and then into India, a lot of the Hindi. What's the was it? You know, the famous language of ancient India. You know, Sanskrit.
Sanskrit. Yeah. I was just going to say that.
Yeah. So these were all people. You know, language. You know, there's like Native American language groups too, and that's controversial because basically a language group as Europeans, as humans migrated out of Africa, you know, how language developed, we're still studying that, but various populations would get separated, you know, like 50,000 years ago. So one group went here and one group went there, and if they're separated, you know, they developed their own languages and their own language groups, and then from this group that got separated from them, you know, other groups would migrate out or disappear, and then, you know, like to develop new languages. Now, if you think of the development of languages, look at your parents. Do you speak the same Spanish as your parents? Same slang?
I never thought about it.
Think about your grandparents. Like, I know in English, there's a lot of terminology I use that my grandfather wouldn't use, and there's a lot of.
But I don't understand why the language.
Because languages are always changing. They're growing.
But we're talking about.
So I'm saying that's how languages develop. You know, if you don't hear, if your group of people is isolated here for like 5,000 years, you're going to develop a new language. But your languages, when they meet, they impact each other sometimes, right? And so languages get mixed up. There's all kinds of things that happen. But so they define the language groups, you know, like there's African language groups, there's Nilotic, there's Bantu, there's I forget all the various ones. And these language groups would have like 5 or different languages that are part of it. There's a proto-language or a language that at one time was a mother tongue, but then it split into all these other languages. Like Latin was a mother tongue of all the Romance languages, you know, but you know, like French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, were all bastardized versions of Latin. They're mixtures of the Germanic languages with Latin. But meanwhile, Latin and Greek are part of the Indo-Aryans, and they're related to Sanskrit, believe it or not.
I believe you.
And so because there's different invasions, you know, so language, they come together, they split apart, they come together depending on all the motions that's going on. So the Khazars, because they left no written records, and mostly what we know about them is from people's descriptions, you know. Then there's not even a lot of, there's some artifacts from that period, you know, but you know, you work in leather and wood and everything. It's hard, that stuff doesn't last unless it's in the desert, you know, that does. So there is some stuff that we know about them, but like I said, it's mostly described from other people.
But they don't do like a genetic
they can
trees.
Yeah, they do that. In fact, what's interesting is when they did the genetic trees in Africa and Europe, they found that language groups pretty much follow the genetic patterns.
In what sense?
In the sense that if you're speaking Bantu and another person is speaking a related language to Bantu, you have a similar genetic. You have some similar genetic markers. At one time, you probably came from the same ancestors. So the languages, they come from a
Mhm.
proto language.
Mhm.
Like everyone spoke this, but as they got separated, then languages developed. Look at all the accents.
Interesting.
How many versions of Spanish are there?
And also, what's going on with these people in Syria? I think it's called Kurds.
Yeah,
Why don't they have a land? Or why they
'Cause they
perceive not to have a
that's
land?
another question. They lost the battle in
What are you
imperialism.
looking for?
No, it's getting late.
I know, you
Yeah.
gotta go. So yeah, okay. So well, have a good night,
Okay.
everybody. And
Thank you
there was
for
so
paying.
much.
If you paid attention, thank you. If you didn't,
They
that's all right.
listen. This is the beauty. It's like a message in a bottle.
Yeah.
And I know one day YouTube is gonna like say, okay, we're gonna disclose. So we're gonna open all these YouTube channels again. So you never know where this is gonna end up. So
does it say how many people watch this?
at the end, I had to close it. I have to close it, but later on, I'll send it to you right now.
Okay, look.
Yeah, there was one. We did 2 hours and 20 minutes.
And then there's one for.
I think that was me. I think that's me that I have
it.
That I have on this window. I was making sure that the sound was coming out okay. I was making sure that the sound was coming out okay.
You could do is have someone else do it, tape it from someone else's computer.
What do you mean?
Like when the show's on, ask them if they could watch it and burn a DVD.
Oh yeah, I can do that. I could just download it.
Yeah, that's easy. Then you don't need a lot of equipment to do that.
Yeah, it takes too much time.
No, no. You don't have friends
download
DVDs?
And upload. Oh, to have to put it on DVDs?
Yeah, like.
And what if DVDs goes out of? And
we'll worry about that when it happens.
They have flash drives now.
So put it on the flash drive.
Let's close this. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Brooke, for having me.
And I'm hoping that you come for part 2 and you're able to bring the books or just the names of the books to like orient it.
And remember, I didn't read most of this book. I just read some of it. But it just shows you it's this big topic.
It never ends. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night. Nice to meet you. This is pretty cool.